Voices from the Mausoleum is brought to you by the You Run Podcast Network and yourunpodcast.com.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum, and welcome to another indie filmmaker interview. Today, I am joined by Vander, who, much like me, has a love for found footage and is going to make for an even better conversation because I always love talking found footage. And we are going to be talking about his movie, Ask.
Trying to do the poster.
Thanks so much for making time to come talk to me. I'm excited.
Angel, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm super excited to talk.
No, me too. Did Preston message you earlier today?
Yes. It was so funny. I was like, hey, man, I want to get out there and start talking about this movie. And he's like, hey, I know a perfect place for you. I just reached out to her.
I was like, how funny. We are literally talking tonight. That is so funny. Yeah. I love Preston. He's such a great guy.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic. He was a huge help in putting this movie together was my project, but then like trying to find a home for it in the world, that's like the most difficult part for most filmmakers. So I was really lucky to have him and Mary Beth. So
yeah. And I think in general, he's like just such a great support for like anybody who needs it. And it's definitely a good match because as anybody who's watched the channel at all will know, found footage is like my favorite subgenre of horror. I'm always down. And one of my favorite things about it, in fact, is the opening of doors for indie filmmakers, for people to get into filmmaking that might not have the big production money or be able to get into these big production companies, but still have something really great to say and that they want to make. And so I always have time to talk to indie filmmakers, especially with found footage.
No, 100%. I think of it's like the punk rock of music or the community theater of theater. Like it's the way that you get your stuff done when you don't have the resources everybody else has,
Sure. No, that's actually a super great way to say that. I totally agree. So your movie Ask is, do you want to tell like a brief synopsis of kind of what the movie is about?
Sure. Yeah, I always struggle with this. The reason I have to make my own movies is because I'm bad at log lining the things that I write. But if I had to put it in a nutshell, I would say it was like the monkey's paw for the influencer generation. Basically, it's about a guy who's trying and failing to be a YouTube influencer and how he sort of stumbles upon this way of getting the dreams he wants in his life from advice from this very strange, mysterious life coach, and how the worm turns on those things that seem like they're great at first and how his life kind of starts to fall apart as a result of it. Yeah.
And I'm such a sucker for anything that's content related because I'm a content creator myself. I think it's such the perfect avenue for found footage style movies in general, just because obvious reasons. It's point of view and it just works really great in general for found footage. And I feel like, when I went into this completely blind, and you were kind enough to send me a screener, so I was able to check it out. Is it currently available? Isn't it it's on something, right? POV?
Yes. POV Horror is the distributor. It's currently submitted to pop up other places. So possibly, depending on when this goes out, it might even be available by the time someone's watching this. But currently, it is available on POV Horror. So anybody who has a subscription there can see it, or you can just go to the site, and I think you can rent it for like $1 or something. But it will be available on all of your favorite streaming sites after that.
Cool. Yeah. So and I will completely avoid spoilers because I've obviously seen it all the way to the end. So I'll avoid spoilers. But I definitely want to talk about where this concept came from, because I think in general, I felt there were some moments where I thought were really funny. There were some moments that had me like, what is going on? And I felt a lot of things kind of watching this, but it definitely felt to me like there's some deeper things going on with this storyline and what you're supposed to feel when you're watching it. So I was very curious to hear about kind of how you got to this concept and wanting to turn it into a film.
Yeah, well, so I guess there were sort of two divergent motivations that combined into this one movie. The first one was a pragmatic one, which is I know a lot of filmmakers struggle to get things made. I, in fact, have struggled to get things made. Back in 2014, I had what I thought was going to be the door opener. I wrote a movie that ended up getting produced. It was a Western that premiered on the Hallmark channel. So I was like, this is the big thing. And then silence for years. I ended up having to go into an entirely different industry because I just couldn't, it wasn't working for me. And so I see a lot of people doing the same thing I'm doing, which was like waiting around for someone to offer you the opportunity. And then I kind of got frustrated, and I kind of tried to inspire people to like stop waiting around. But then I realized, well, I can't really give people that advice if I haven't done it myself.
Yeah.
So that was the first impetus, was like, I want to make something and I don't want to have to ask for permission or money. So how do I do that?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, the other motivation was my current career. I work in marketing. So I run into a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about, who are somewhat shady, who are trying to get something over on someone else. And I kept noticing this sort of weird, this sweaty desperation to be seen and appreciated for things they're not even really that good at to begin with. And something stuck in my head about that. And I was like, I've seen enough of those guys that I feel like I could play one of those guys.
Yeah.
And so I sort of started reverse engineering those two elements to figure out, well, how can that become a project? And how can I do what I think is the most important thing for anybody working on a budget is like, how do you reverse engineer everything you have at your disposal so that it looks like it was intentionally part of the project as opposed to just a thing that was happening in your life,
Right.
So that's what I did. I sort of reverse engineered there was one big key moment, a plot element of the film that I knew. I was like, all right, I have to get the first half of the movie shot before this thing happens. Because it's a big plot point. It's actually the teeth. I had bad teeth at the beginning of the movie, and I have, as you can see, much nicer teeth now. And it's because there was a point at which I had to get surgery to replace my front 6 teeth.
Yeah.
And being the pragmatic producer I am, I'm like, that's a big life change.
Yeah.
There's got to be a way I can work that into a plot. And so I just worked backwards from that.
That's crazy. I wondered that. I was like, that's such a huge difference. Like, how was that achieved? Well, that answers that. That's crazy. I would have never guessed that.
Yeah, it's my movie is the most expensive $0 film ever made because I just added all the things in that were happening in my life that would have been.
Crazy.
Do you imagine how expensive it would have been to fake having bad teeth for half a movie?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yes, no, and I couldn't figure out how either because I was like, man, that's insane. Because and this is a one-man show, right? I mean, it's just you.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there were a couple of cameos from friends of mine in very small parts in the background. And then a podcaster friend of mine named Dan Scully did that one sequence where he absolutely reads me the riot act about not knowing what I'm doing in my career. Yeah. But yeah, aside from that, I was very proud of the fact that I would say like 90% of the film is carried largely by a single person. So I'm pretty proud of that, considering I don't think of myself as an actor. So
yeah. And that's like one of the coolest things in found footage, I think, in general, because that's where it happens the most, is when the same person is the writer, director, and they act in it, and you do all of the parts. So that's insane. Like
you get a lot of multi-hyphenates in the found footage arena.
A lot of hats. Yeah.
But also, like, this movie basically would have been impossible for me to make if I needed to have an actor other than myself. Sure. There's scenes that I shot in Vegas during an event that I was going to for legal marketing. I wouldn't have been able to just bring an actor along with me, So like, if I play the lead and I name it after myself, then no matter where I shoot and what I capture, it can always technically be a part of the character I'm playing, So
sure. That makes a lot of sense. That's really smart filmmaking. I'm wrapping my head around this, thinking about the scenes in the movie and what that's awesome though. And two, like, I think in general, one of the things that works so well in this is the character that you're portraying as yourself, essentially, where you're like, because I think like, and I was just talking about this earlier today about one of the things, and this is horror in general, but I think it can be harder to do in found footage specifically, is making the viewer invested in the character to the point where they genuinely care about them as a human being. I don't think that that's always a super easy thing to do. And I don't know if some of that's because I'm a content creator, but I think most of it had to do with the overall performance and the story making just a lot of sense, because I think in the content creating world, what you were putting into this character is very realistic for a lot of people. Like, there's scenes in particular where like you're faking things and you're setting things up to look like different things than they are. And I think that that's very realistic on the content creating side of things, and just being in that position and trying to do what it takes to get to that point, but sticking true to what you're saying And it just balanced a lot of those things that I think are very realistic for content creators, which made you as a character way more, it made me care a lot more about what happened to you, which just made me engaged overall from beginning to end.
Well, that means a lot to me because I'm not going to lie. I knew that the character I was playing was like, he was a little over the top. He was a little bit desperate. And so I was concerned about him being super likable throughout. But I think the thing that I tapped into that I felt like gave me a level of humanity, which is really funny because I'm playing Chris Vander, which is my actual name. So it's strange to call it a character. But the thing that was most like me in the character I was playing was the imposter syndrome that he has. Like that I can relate to. I've been in an industry where I'm in rooms sometimes with guys that are worth tens of millions of dollars, these attorneys, and I'm supposed to be teaching them things. So I was very easily able to tap into the idea of feeling like at any time you're a little bit of a fraud. And I realized so I sort of stumbled backwards into something that made my character more relatable, but also accidentally filled into the larger theme of the movie. Like what ends up happening to him, the imposter syndrome obviously becomes a much bigger element later in the story.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think you did that balance really well, because I think, to your point, you know, there is that fraud element, but there's something about the way that it occurs that feels more natural, and I think allows for, at least for me as a viewer, to feel empathy and to want better things for you as the character, as opposed to just being like, oh, he's the worst. Like, I think that there's a place for those characters. Don't get me wrong. I think that they exist and they have their place. But I think this was a very interesting line to toe between, do I want good things for this character, or like kind of where I feel for that. And I guess the other thing I kind of wanted to ask about, specifically related to the content creating thing, is you work in marketing. Have you done content creating before? Because I feel like you pulled from that very well, like you had been doing it for a really long time.
So if you were to search my name on the internet, you might find some random pieces of things out there for different legal companies that I've worked for. For the most part, I have remained behind the camera, though, for the content creation. However, that means I have been watching a lot of other people creating content. And so that has made as much a negative impact as it is positive, meaning I know what not to do as well as what to do. You know, you can see, like, I'm not the world's best actor, but I do know certain things that would make me look worse because I've watched other people do it very badly, you know? So sometimes it's not about being the best performer. It's like avoiding all of the giant pitfalls. And then also for me, I didn't have a set script. I am a writer, but I intentionally didn't have a set script for this. I had a beat sheet. And the reason for that is because I knew if I was trying to hit a scene, like if I was trying to get a line right, the performance would look like I was trying to get a line right. But if I had the kernel of the emotion that I knew I needed, but I didn't write it down, then you would also see in real time me figuring out how to express it. And that would feel more like I was having the emotion in the moment. So I actually recommend that to any found footage filmmakers. I think a lot of them probably are improvised, but for anybody who's thinking about it, it's much easier. Well, maybe it's just much easier for me because I'm just one guy, but you know, it's harder to do that with 2 or 3 people. But it was much easier for me to get what I thought were good performances in. I don't think I ever did a third take, but for one scene, it was all 1 or 2 takes. In fact, the entire final scene with without spoiling the teeth sequence, that was 1 take. It was raining outside. I didn't have a change of clothes. So I had to do it all in 1 take. I only got 1 shot at it because I was at a friend's house. It was raining. It wasn't going to clear up. So I was like, and he was like, you got to take my phone. You can't even use yours because this is waterproof and yours isn't. So I was using a phone I'd never used before. So it was a little nerve wracking. So I feel like that was, in some ways, it was really helpful because I knew when I walked out there, I had to land it. This was the only swing I had at the bat, you know? So there was that anxiety, I think, which helped the performance a little.
Yeah, I think that makes sense given what's going on. Yeah, for sure. And doing something in this style, which I feel like, I think filmmaking in general is probably very difficult. I'm not a filmmaker. I have no idea. But with it specifically being in found footage style and having to do it through these different ways, and filming in the different locations, was there anything in particular that made, you know, getting these types of shots particularly difficult, or like a hurdle you had to overcome to be able to accomplish what you wanted for a scene?
Well, ironically, the difficult part was not actually the shooting of anything. It was the reverse engineering of figuring out like I said, here's 6 huge things that are happening in my life over the next 3 months. I know I'm going to use in this movie.
Sure.
How am I going to use it?
Yeah.
Do I have the time to do what I need to do in the moments that it's happening? Like there's a point in the movie where I go to some sort of a sales event. You don't really see a lot. I was actually at an event. And I actually just shot footage at the place that I was at when people weren't in the room where it was happening. So there is definitely a level of difficulty in squeezing a shoot in between the work you're actually supposed to be doing for other things.
Sure.
In fact, there are a couple of stolen shots in there. There's a point at which I'm presenting and you can just see it, me shooting from below my face. And then I say something about like, oh, I didn't know I wasn't able to set the camera up. I actually shot that during a presentation I was doing at an actual conference. Because I thought, you know what, nothing's ever going to look more like a presentation than an actual presentation. So
that's great.
Yeah, so much of this movie is weird happenstance and fingers crossed luck that it ended up coming together, you know. But for me, the most difficult part really was just saying, you know, anybody, this sounds bad, but anybody has a camera in their pocket now. They can string together 65 minutes of information and make a film out of it. I wanted to see, is it possible for you to make a movie that's interesting and entertaining for less than $250, meaning it's all built on interesting ideas because you don't have anything else. And so the most important thing to me was like, what's the next way I can make the next scene more interesting or weird or different than, you know, I don't want to do, you know, as effective as they've been. I'm not the guy that could make something I hear a noise in the house and there's a slow investigation. Like I got a dog and I get, you know, like there's too many things that factor into not being able to execute that well. So how can I make the idea the star of the movie as opposed to the scare moments or that kind of stuff? So that was the challenge for me.
Yeah. And I think it's crazy to think about because I'm thinking about some of the shots and I'm trying to think of how to ask this because again, I don't want to do any spoilers, but there's some shots in this that I don't know if it's just illusion. I don't know if it was editing, but like there's a scene in particular where you show where you're living one place and then we see something else where I was like, it seemed so smooth that I was like, that's the same room, right? Like I was looking and I was like, how do we do this? Like, how did you go from being in the space that I'm seeing you in right this second, right? Yep. And then we see this other room. It was very strange and it made me feel kind of mystified, I think, which is great considering I think that's what we're supposed to feel as a viewer in this circumstance. You're like, holy cow, like how did this? And I just thought like some of those things are just so well done that it does leave you, I think, feeling kind of like what Chris, the character, is feeling too, because you're like, how did this happen? What is going on? And as a viewer, that came across every single time those moments occurred, because like same thing with the teeth. I was thinking, I was like, how is this? I don't understand how you did it. Like, you know, that kind of thing. Of course, now I know that one, but as far as like some of these other shots, like, and is this your first feature length?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So like to come out as, you know, this is your first feature and it's in found footage, which I just feel is not a super easy cut and dry formula. I think, you know, found footage has elements that work, but I think they have to be executed in a very specific way. Tension building, character engagement, those are things that matter when you're talking about found footage. And I'm watching this and I don't know that I would have guessed that it was your first film. At the very least, I would have thought maybe you did a bunch of shorts before or something, because there's shots like that I have to say were just really, really well done.
Well, thank you very much. My shorts are long buried and will not be resurfacing anytime soon.
Oh, okay.
Years ago, you know, like the kind of stuff you do when you're a kid. But the sequence you're talking about, I think it's with the door transition, right? Where the door opens and it's a different house on the outside of the door.
Yes.
Yeah. So I stumbled onto that. I actually wasn't even sure how I was going to do that sequence, but I was over at my in-laws' apartment and I went into one of their side bedrooms to get something. And when I looked, they had closed the door behind me. And I was like, oh, they have the same handle door on their apartment that I do on my bedroom apartment, basically. And so I was like, well, I looked at it and then I sort of framed it up. I took a still picture of it with my phone and I went home and I looked at it. I'm like, sure enough, this is the same knob. So all I did was I shot in my room and I turned around so you could see the doorknob. But then when I reach in, I do a really fast snap cut to when I'm grabbing the doorknob in their house. And so, so basically, I open the door one time and it's my house. I open the door the next time and it's a different house. So But that was, remember I said I never shot any scene more than twice except for one. That was the one that I had to shoot more than twice.
Probably because it had to be so
right. It was 4 takes to make sure that I had that seamless moment that I could cut during.
That's crazy.
And then, that one. And then I only shot it twice, but the most difficult setup in the movie was the hot tub scene where I was in the pool and the guy appeared behind me. Yeah. So that one was difficult because it was all about the timing and orchestration of where I was in the frame. And that's why it was important to me that I couldn't cut, because I know if there was a cut, even if I had done it all in one take, but if they saw a cut, they'd assume that there was some, he just did that in post. So I knew it all had to be in a single unbroken cut so that they could see that I pulled off the, very difficult stunt. So no, not a stunt, but the very difficult framing of the scene.
A lot goes into that. It's choreographed in a very specific way and I always say, like, this is one of the reasons that humor and horror go so well together, because they're all about timing, and the timing of things is what makes that work. Because I think and especially with that part, with that specific time in the film, I don't think I was I guess prepared to be looking around like I ended up being after that, because then after that I'm paranoid, because then I'm like like you start looking around and it creates it just creates that, like, okay, I need to be really making sure I'm paying attention just in case there's like other things that I'm missing. But at that point there hadn't been a reason for me to think to do that. So when it happens, it's like, so, and then after that, it's like constant worrying about it. But I did kind of want to touch on this too, because I feel like, as far as, like the creep moments, the paranoia, the fear, the things that come up, the anxiety, all of these things that come up, you use very different techniques for all of these things. It's not like, a cut and dry, everything that happens is a jump scare, everything that happens is in the dark, everything. It's very like just very different techniques, like something being different, like the room that we talked about, or there's a lot of different techniques. How did you kind of go about those? Were those things that just sort of happened naturally? Did you know you wanted to make it sort of a unique experience?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being honest, I've probably not as many as you, but I've seen a lot of found footage films. And the one thing that's tough about a found footage movie is that sometimes they'll come upon a really clever way of doing a revelation or a scare or something.
Sure.
And it's great the first time, and it's okay the second time. And then by the third time, you see it coming, and then you've gotten tired of it, right? And so for me, it was more about, like, I don't want to go back to the well. If at all possible, I don't want to do a thing enough times so that someone will see it coming the next time I do it, So what I tried to do was find, like, what are the things that make me uncomfortable in life? And is there a way for me to model that in film? And one of the, like, you probably noticed this, it's, even though it's not a long film, I think it's 78 minutes long or something like that. It's shorter than 90 minutes, but there are some moments where there's a lot of silence, particularly in the final act. There's silence. And what I realized was, that makes people desperately uncomfortable nowadays, because there's so much information happening all the time. If you've invested an hour of your time into this movie, and then for the final act, I'm going to have whole 15-second passages where not only am I not saying anything, but there's literally no sound at all because of the particular camera that's filming me, then it becomes a different thing, because now you don't know why you're discomfort, like, because it's a subconscious thing. That's true. But they're just giving me the credit for being uncomfortable for something I did. But all I'm really doing is just taking away one of the senses that they're used to having, So And basically that was the operating factor for me, was like, what are the most inexpensive ways to duplicate the feeling that I have in life, that's sometimes scared, sometimes just confused, like, or disoriented, like you said with the door, and to just try to stack as many of those different types of experiences in a row as I could,
Yeah. And I think, like, and because I do have like an entire series on found footage, my co-host and I talk about found footage a lot. It's like a big talk about it constantly. And one of the things that we talk about a lot when we are reviewing movies in that subgenre is this idea that found footage has to be this very specific formula. And I think if for anyone not familiar, the found footage formula is nothing for the first hour and then utter chaos for the last 15 minutes. But there are so many films that do that, where I have been so bored for the first hour. then I don't really care what happens in the last 15 minutes. And I think what's interesting is you made an effective found footage movie that I feel personally had a message, at least for me it did. But you kind of redid the formula in a way that kept things happening constantly, maybe not constantly, but consistently enough that there's not a lull in what's going on. There's not time for me as the viewer to go, okay, how much longer is this movie? You know, like, because I do that countless. Like, found footage is a great subgenre. There's a lot of duds, and so
Right.
it's just the truth of the subgenre. That's just how it is. And so I never once felt that way. I'm like I said, mentioned earlier, I'm huge into content creating things in general. I love that, but it felt like it was a new type of formula for found footage movies, because it's not that the ending isn't crazy. It is. And I definitely don't know that I could have predicted that was how it was going to end. But I think there's also enough things throughout that also give you feelings like we were just talking about. And I think that that's probably what I'm hoping to see maybe more in other found footage movies, because using those different techniques works. It worked.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of equate it to, to your point, one of the reasons that I came up with the ending that I did was that I knew, I was like, whatever's going to happen to this character, it's going to happen in broad daylight and everybody's going to know it happened. Because one of the most frustrating things for me is like they'll build all the way to the end, and then what you get is like the camera wobbles and falls on the floor and you hear screaming and disappears, and then it's over. And I'm like, that can be effective. It's been effective a couple of times.
Yeah.
But you can only go back to that well so many times. So I'm like, you know what? Mine's going to, whatever it is, it's going to be in daylight. It's going to be center frame, But then to your point about I wanted there to be a constantly shifting element to the story, meaning like, I kind of put it this way, like you forget that your what do you call it? Your GPS is on if you're on a long road that's not turning,
Yeah.
And you forget it's
That's
happening.
a good way to put
But
that. Yeah.
If you constantly have a left turn or a right, or you're hitting a stop sign or whatever, it's always talking to you,
Yes.
So you have to be more actively engaged.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way I thought of the movie. It was just like, well, in this scene, he got a weird thing that came under the door. So that buys me 3 minutes that I can do a monologue, because they're wondering what the door thing was.
What is
and then
that?
The next
Right.
is, okay, here's a strange thing that happened in his life. How does he solve that? Well, that buys me 2 or 3 more minutes before they start to wonder, like, is he going to get back to So like, it's kind of like me paying with a mystery that'll hold you for a couple more minutes worth of dialogue, because that's kind of most of what I could afford to do at the time,
No, yeah. Well, and I think like I think it works, because I think that the other thing is, and this can be true about Monkey Paw as well, but I think it's interesting because the stakes get higher the longer we're going through, which I think also turns the journey into a much more realistic one overall, because it doesn't start out just off the wall, right? It starts out as these very subtle things that that Chris character is talking about. It feels weird to say Chris because you're but it's very not all of the earlier things are simple per se, but it starts out as this one smaller piece, and then over time, as the movie progresses, those things get worse and worse and worse until you get to just this crazy level of like, what are we going to do with this now? And
I think the cops are after me now. Yeah.
And it's crazy. That scene is so much too. Like I was like, how in the world, like, and I'm sitting here like thinking, I'm like, how does he get out of this? Right? Like, what's the end result? And I will say this, I again, avoiding spoilers.
Should we just, if we wave our arms like this, and then we'll just say, hey, if you don't want to be spoiled, look for the next time Chris waves his arms and we're done talking about the spoilers.
Actually, you know what? I have a somewhere. Do I have it? Oh, I do. I have a banner.
There we go. So we can talk about it. I'm comfortable with
just
a little bit
quickly,
of spoiler.
because I thought like, okay, so when you're being chased by the cops,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, is he going to end it with just being shot? Like, surely it can't be that simple. And not only was it not that simple, it got like way more complex after that, because you asked like that scene when you're out in public and you're trying to get attention and like nobody's. I was like, I loved how unpredictable some of those moments were, because that's another thing that happens when you watch as much found footage as I have, or even enough horror movies in general. It doesn't even have to be found footage. You begin to pick up on patterns and you're like, oh, know where this is going, know where this is going. And I can genuinely say that didn't happen, because first of all, I thought he was going to get killed by the cops. I thought that was going to be the end of the movie. I thought we were going to Paranormal Activity ending number 2,700 it or something. Right. And then it was like, you go into public and I'm like thinking about like how awful that would be to be in a position where you did technically ask for that, right?
Yeah.
But that's obviously not what you meant, which is kind of the whole thing. But that whole thing of just like of being there and like no one, that gave me so much anxiety because I was like,
Right. Well, and you understand it too, because especially because he was wanted to be a content creator. Like his whole goal is to find an audience. So he's literally robbed of the only thing that he's been struggling for this whole time. Yeah.
It was crazy. And I think and that's the thing. I think when I say like, I feel like this had a message, it was so interesting because, I think as a content creator, I'm still very early days. I've been doing this for just over 3 years and we're starting to finally pick up traction and we just hit 1,000 subs and it can be for some of us a very slow process. And so some of these moments where you're like, I am working hard, genuinely, like I'm putting in the time, I'm trying to do the right things, but it's taking forever. You're ready to get to that moment of gratification, right? So it felt so relatable in that sense. And then not thinking about like, obviously this is a mystical situation where you're like getting wishes granted and then bad shit happens after the fact. But like in real life, it's like wanting those things. I don't know. Like I just felt like that part of it was very interesting. And weirdly enough, it came at maybe the right time when I watched it, but it just sort of reminded me to be just kind of grateful for where I am and just to kind of take a step back and be like, it'll get there eventually, but like, look at what has happened. Look at it was just this moment of like, I can relate to these feelings and I don't want to die through a weird business card.
We can all relate it to that, but no, it makes me so happy that you felt that way, because for me, if people took nothing else away from this film other than this one point, I feel sometimes people struggle with wanting to be known for something, ends up overtaking their desire and passion and interest in doing the thing.
Yes.
And you will frequently, I don't want anybody to end up as Mr. Beast. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want anybody to smile with empty eyes because all they need to do is get a couple of more subs. Like, for me, doing anything is worth doing because of the thing. And if people want to go on the journey with you, then all the better. And hopefully it starts to support itself and then maybe support you. But my thing was always like, the fear for me always is like, this guy found the easy way, and it's the worst possible thing that could have happened to him as a human being. And that to me is supposed to be symbolic of what I frequently see when people, they become very reductive or they become very negative or they decide they're going to target a stupid thing that doesn't matter because that's how you get clicks on Star Wars videos or whatever it is. You know what I mean? And so, like, to me, that the appeal of saying that is to remind everybody, whether it's content creators or whatever interactions you have on the internet, it's not worth the dopamine hit of the couple of extra clicks for taking the shortcut of being a piece of shit. Pardon my French. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think too, the other thing is like, I know people that, if they do, for example, a series on their channel or their podcast or whatever that they really, really love, but it doesn't benefit them greatly, then they just won't do it anymore. And I got to tell you, like, I don't have that in me because like, one of the reasons I do this is because I enjoy the conversations. I've met so many amazing people, found so many talented creators in books and film and acting. And I mean, just regular content creators, podcasters, the whole nine. And I don't have it in me, I think, to just give stuff up for the sake of numbers, like, because I think it's a weird, like, for me, I just want to be able to do the things that bring me joy because I'm the one that has to spend the time doing it. Like, we did, a friend of mine and I did a short mini series on conspiracy theories, which is technically horror adjacent, but it's my channel. I can do whatever I want. Right. So I was like, I really want to do this. This is the perfect friend to do this with. And it, like, view wise, it did not do very great, but when I tell you, it did not stop me from continuing the episodes until we were done with our mini series, like, because I don't ever want to be like that. I don't want to get to a place where I'm like only doing something for views or for acknowledgements, or I want to do something because I care about it, because that's where I started. But I think it's so easy for people to lose that, especially when they do get that bump or they do get to that place.
100%. Well, and that's part of what I like about found footage filmmaking. As a rule, with the exception of maybe 3% of the found footage movies in the world, all of them are made by people who don't have a lot of money. So they're doing it because they love the genre, because they love the idea. There's some level of passion to what they're doing. And that's the only reason that they'd be doing it. They're not, I mean, I'm not going to be rewarded massively financially, no matter how well this movie does. Like, it's
you're
never
right,
going to do numbers that like I get to retire from my job, you know? But the reason I like found footage filmmaking is because I don't have to ask anybody for the permission to tell this particular story the way I want. It might not be as polished as any other story I get to tell, but I also don't have to, I don't have to have those conversations with the producers that are going to, am I allowed to say YouTube influencers are garbage, you know, or is that going to be a problem for when we have to market this thing, you know? I don't know. And there's something about that to me. And by the way, I know I was using it as an example. I understand I'm on a YouTube show right now. So everybody who's watching, I know, that was a fake example, obviously. But you know what I mean? Like, so one of the things that I think has become so sad is that as movies get larger and budgets get larger, everything becomes toothless to some degree.
Yeah.
Horror movies still exist. Whereas we're speaking, Terrifier 3 has made $50 million, the highest grossing unrated film of all time in theaters. Yeah. But honestly, horror is the only one in the game that's still doing things you're technically not supposed to be able to do. And that's what I love about found footage is kind of the horror movie of horror movies, meaning like it can even go further because we don't even have to ask for the little bit of money that most other horror movies get. We don't have any. But for that, you know, for that trade-off, we also get to just do whatever we want, you know?
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. Yeah. I think, and I touched on this briefly in the beginning of our conversation, but that's one of the reasons I think I love it so much as a subgenre, because it really does just have a freedom, and it just offers up people whose voices we normally don't get to hear, get an opportunity at filmmaking. Because, you know, when you're talking about the big production companies, I won't say that none of them ever put out anything original, but the problem is they're like car manufacturers. They mass produce horror at a level because they've now realized it will make them money. And in doing so, they're filming, you know, franchises, like 3 movies, and they're filming them in 6 months. And it's like, that's not like, you're just getting it out. Like, you're not putting the time and the energy and the love. And it shows, because when the movie comes out, or movies in this case, then people are reacting to how poorly they were made because they were rushed to make money. And I just, with indie filmmakers, particularly in the subgenre of found footage, you don't really find that, because like, I don't know anybody that makes a found footage movie that's not a passion project. Yeah.
I also feel like there's a level of, you can still be surprised and feel unsafe in a found footage film in a way that you can't with other movies, not just because of the style, although that's a big part of it, but also like, I don't know what this dude in Akron, Ohio did with his camera in his living room by himself. Like, it could be a little terrifying. Like, when I see a sequence, I'm like, I'm not sure if that's an effect. I don't know if that guy really did that. I have no idea. So there's like that level of, you know, like you stumble onto a used VHS tape in a thrift store and you see something on it and you don't know if you could trust it or not. Like, you can still get that feel from a found footage film. And also, like I said, surprise. Like, for instance, the sequence where I was trying to get people's attention and they couldn't see me in that one scene, there's a man being arrested by a police officer in the background of that shot. And that actually was happening. Like, when we pulled up to do the scene, a man was being arrested. And so in my head, I just in real time rewrote what the intent of the scene was so that it could involve a man being arrested in the background behind me. And I just wrote it into the scene.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So like, you'd never be able to do that on a film set. On a film set, they shut down until whatever's going on with the cops goes away. Well, no, guess what? I can turn my camera on from inside my car, shoot this scene, and capture the sequence of a man being arrested by actual police officers in real time in a Publix parking lot, you know? So it's,
that's crazy.
It is a little bit crazy. Yeah. It's one of the stories I do plan on telling if I ever get to make my, I want to work on a documentary about how to teach other people to do the same thing, you know, for a little money. And obviously that's my lead off story, is like, you never know what kind of amazing production value you're going to get if you're just open to capturing surprises when they happen, you know?
That I'm processing still. There's probably like a loading bar above my head. I'm like thinking about that scene, and it's like I would have never in a million years guessed that was just spur of the moment. What? Yeah.
Well, and that's why, like, I can make a movie that with the sequence with 2 different scenes that looked like they had police officers in or had police presence in it. Neither one did. Well, one did, but I didn't hire them. They just showed up and they were doing their job, and I filmed it. And then in the other one, it was literally just lights and framing, you know. But like, it's all those little producer tricks that you can do to make something seem more complex or, you know, more difficult. Like, my whole thing is, I'm telling you this because it's a fun conversation to have, but like, I don't tell people this before they watch the movie because I want them to assume that all of that production value is something I planned and spent money and time and effort on. You know what I mean? Like, I want them to believe that I,
crazy though. Yeah. I'm like, but see, that's what do they call it? Movie magic, right? Where it's like, you just.
Well, and that's what I mean by found footage. Like if they were out shooting with, 35mm film or even like fancy digital equipment and there's 20 people on a set, they can't afford to stand around and figure out how to redo a scene so that they can incorporate something's happening in the background. They got to turn around, point it somewhere else. They got to wait till the guy leaves, whatever. I get to just rewrite on the fly, like there's no rules to this. So
yeah, that's crazy. What? Now I'm going to have to go rewatch it.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at all these little details.
Yeah, it was really funny. It wouldn't even have worked out if the plan had gone the way it was supposed to. I was going to shoot in the parking lot of a school, and it was on a Sunday afternoon, and I went over there, and they had the gates up, and I couldn't get into the parking lot of the school. So I was like, well, I don't want to not shoot this. Both of the actresses that were in the scene, they'd already gone out there. So we just like, let's just shoot it in the parking lot across the street at the grocery store. As I'm pulling in, I see cops in the parking lot. I'm like, we got to go set up in that dentist's office and point. So they're in the background. Let's do this thing. So like, it was all just kismet that scene came together. It would have been an entirely different thing had we shot where we had intended to.
That is nuts.
Yeah.
That is crazy. I mean, yeah, I agree. I totally understand what you're talking about too, with the flexibility to do things like that, filming in this way versus if you're, stuck on a specific set and you've got, I'm still processing. That's insane. Because it happens, like the flow of what you're saying, like everything that you're reacting to feels very real. And the bonus to that, right, is that in addition to that isolated feeling, that's even worse. Like that feeling that whatever that emotion was that I felt when you say that part about why that guy's being, I was like, what? I was like, that's horrible.
Because he's now responsible accidentally for someone else's misery.
Bad happening to somebody else. Yep. And that's the thing, is because I think the whole time you're getting to know this character, you feel that he's not a bad person. Like, that's not like, you don't walk away, or at least I didn't. I wasn't in this thinking like, what a garbage human being. Like, I never felt that way. And I didn't even then, because at that point I'm so invested and I just want to see what's going to happen. Right. But it's like, it's a moment. It was such a weird mix of emotions, because that's right after we get the isolation feeling and all of the stuff from the other part of it. And then that just made it even worse. It was just like, what? Yeah.
Well, and that was a delicate balance too, because like you said, there are movies where it's fine for someone to be an unrepentant asshole. Like sometimes we root for the slasher to get the people that he's after. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But in this case, there's one character for the most of this movie. He cannot be intolerable, right? So I have to figure out a way to ride. I have to balance the line of, we know he's lost. We know he's not very good. We know he's struggling, but there has to be some sense of heart to him too. You know what I mean? I can't just be totally dismissive, because otherwise nothing's going to land in the second half of the movie,
Yeah, I will save the drama and I won't mention the film, but there is a found footage movie that made a terrible casting choice with an awful human being in real life. And that was their character. And it was unfortunate, because I think that the film in concept had some really cool ideas of what it was trying to do. But the problem is the main character was so insufferable that it ruined the entire film. And I absolutely hated it. And it was just kind of
makes me want to see if I can guess which one it is.
It's the only film I've ever spoken that negatively about, especially because I do love found footage. So even movies that like I don't really rate that high or end up not really being for me, it's very rarely because it's just a bad film. Very, very rarely. It's usually just because, I'm not a big fan of like what I call people found footage, which is like a Creep or Leslie Vernon. Like, I don't really like found footage about people. I like for there to be like something else going on, something supernatural or mystic or weird or monsters or something like that. But when we're done recording, I'll tell you the movie. but I've spent so much time talking about this movie in such a negative way, but it really did ruin the film, to your point. So I think with it being that this is the person we are with the entirety of the film, It's definitely, like you said, got to be a balance of this
Yep.
push and pull, which I think again was balanced really well.
Yeah. Well, and that comes down to the sense of humor too. Like I worked very hard to
Yeah.
like have that flow throughout. So I didn't want it to be a horror comedy. You know what I mean? Like nobody's,
No, I
getting
wouldn't say
blood
it is.
explode in their faces. But I
No.
did know that I had to be able to release the stress valve, and I also had to have him be somewhat relatable. And the things that are happening
Yeah.
to him are so absurd that if he didn't point out their absurdity in some way, then he doesn't seem realistic. So it does
Right.
two jobs. It helps
Yeah.
it feel like it's an organic drift into, he's the frog in the pot that's the water's slowly boiling around him, and he's adjusting to it, unfortunately. But at the same time, it also allows for that humor, which I think is so important to like make him a human being,
I agree. I will tell you in particular, the part where you say, I don't even know, I guess I need to name this dog. That made me chuckle because I was like, in the moment, I was like, that would be me in that situation. I feel like all this other stuff, and I'm like, well,
yeah, the mundane reality that exists within all the cosmic horror, and he's like, well, I still got to feed the dog.
I
You know what I mean? Like, yeah,
take
there's
care of this thing.
Yeah.
And naming it, which means you do care on some level, right? Because then you're invested.
Yeah.
That part, there's a couple other moments that kind of had me chuckling to myself, but that one in particular was when I remembered way after the fact, because I was like, that really would be me. Like, I'd be like, oh, well, I guess we got to figure this out together.
Yeah, no, it was fun. And that line that you're talking about, that was another one where it only occurred to me when I started talking about going back to the house that I was like, my character needs to address the fact that he left 3 days ago and there was a dog in that house when he left. And I realized while I was shooting the scene that I hadn't until that point. So that moment is me just realizing I need to address it somehow and just sort of doing it off the top of my head. But so that's what I mean by that. Like the finds in the movie, you can, that's the value for me of found footage is like, I feel safe not structuring dialogue and then finding stuff in the moment. That was a way better moment than anything I would have sat down and tried to think of,
Yeah, you're right. And it's ironic that you said that because I kind of started our conversation with that before I hit record. I was like, I tend to not, super write out everything I want to talk about when I do conversations, because then I hyper fixate on those moments and they don't flow. Like, I feel like this flowed like a conversation. Like, it's just a very different thing. So to your point, I think that's probably how I would have to be in that situation as well, because writing, I feel like at least in a script sense or in, any type of, whether it's content creating or filmmaking, I think it can be very limiting if you stick to just that, or you're trying to stick to just that. And so to your point, doing it that way, you're able to just kind of be yourself and let things come out, and it feels more natural in general. Cause I'm telling you, the dog thing made me laugh. I was like, it made me laugh for sure.
Yeah. No, I fully admit the fact that like I'm very deeply script projects when I work with better actors than me. But okay.
So it's specific because you knew that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like I'm not a good enough actor
you
to deliver dialogue. Like I'm a good enough actor, but that's not true. I mean, if I had enough bites at the apple, but I knew I had 2 takes at most on any scene, basically. Sometimes I literally would have to be shooting something in the middle of a moment that will never be captured again, like the airplane sequence. I was literally eating my actual breakfast in an airplane. In an airport when I recorded that, and that was it. I had 15 minutes till the plane took off. So like this is the one and done. So it was important to me not to write the dialogue because, like you said, if you're trying to hit a line, it's going to seem canned, and I'm going to have to do it 2, 3, 4 times before I get accustomed to it. And like, can you imagine that final sequence? I got blood pouring out of my mouth, and I screwed up the line, so I got to start the sequence. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not feasible as a project.
Sure. No, you're right.
Yeah. So luckily, I figured that out at the beginning. I didn't spend any time scripting, and then because I would have been pretty mad if I spent a ton of time writing dialogue for myself and then finding out I had to scrap it all anyway.
And then just not, No, I get that. Well, before we wrap up, I did want to kind of ask, do you plan on doing more films? Are you going to stick with found footage? What's down the pipeline for you?
Yeah, well, listen, I'm ready to sell out anytime somebody wants to give me more money, but yeah. I'm perfectly happy to make the next, 7th Final Destination movie. But I am currently in the process of working on several projects, all of which are varying degrees of either found footage or fake documentary, which are,
I love documentaries. Very cool. Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm working on 3 of those that are in various states of production, pre-production, production, post-production. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I am working on a couple of things that are related to Ask. One is a possible sequel, depending, we'll see on how this received, whether or not there's a market for a sequel. It's a very interesting new direction for the franchise. Like this is freaking Spider-Man. But I have an idea for a sequel, but I'm holding off to wait and see if there's even reason to do it. But then the other two pieces, I've already written a book called Make Your Movie Now, and it's specifically about how to make a movie with nothing but creativity and less than $500. And I used this film. I basically created this film in order to be able to have the proof of concept that this is a thing you can do. And then I wrote a book about it to teach other people how to do it. And I'm talking to a couple of publishers. There's one I'm very keen on working with, so I'm waiting to see how they feel. But I'm thinking that probably will come out in 2025, and it's going to be basically sort of an instruction manual. And then I'm working on a documentary that's a similar sort of thing, where I'm literally going to break down the entire film to show someone how they can just reverse engineer a project like this based on the assets they have in their own life, you know, and just sort of work their way backwards into a production based on what are the things that you have at your disposal? What are your talents? What are the people that you know around you have? You know, that sort of stuff, which is what I did. And so those are all things that I'm working on to varying degrees to try and get out. I mean, the point I made this movie, you know, I made it specifically, well, I want people to be entertained, but I made it, like I said, because I want people to feel like they're empowered to do it themselves. Well, it wouldn't be that helpful if I didn't also literally show them exactly how it is that I did it. So some of the other pieces that I'm working on, in addition to, I have ADHD, if you couldn't tell. So I can't ever have one project I'm working on.
That is a whole ass mood. Me too. I'm never just doing one thing. And then I'm doing so many that I can't do anything. That happens to me a lot. Where it's like, I need more things to keep my brain busy, but then my brain is so busy that I can't get anything done. And
there's a situation where there's one that's clearly going to move forward more easily, but I'm still working on this thing that doesn't have any clear home, you know, but I can't let go of it. It's got to be done.
Yeah.
So, but so that what I will say is absolutely, I'm not going anywhere from the found footage and fake documentary arena. I have 3 projects that I'm working on as we speak. And one I'm working on actually with my friend, Steven, the one who played the forensic tech at the beginning and end of the movie.
Oh, yeah.
That's Steven Espinoza. He was the editor on this film and did the only visual effects shot in the movie. Which I won't spoil what it is, but you know what it was.
Okay, very cool.
Towards the end there, so we're working on a project together that's sort of a like literal found footage. It's a project that actually takes a lot of archival footage and sort of compiles it together into an interesting alternate history type of thing. So, got a lot of irons in the fire. So,
no, I love it. Yeah. Well, any future projects you want to come on and talk about or help, let me know if I can help promote it for sure.
I will, even if you don't promote it, I will make sure you know, because I want to get fun work in front of people who appreciate it. And you have, like I said, because we talked earlier about Savage Land, you have impeccable taste in found footage filmmaking. So
have you seen my other one that I always talk about that no one's ever seen? I got 2 people to watch it this week though, is Monster Project. So here's the thing. I saw, I don't know who it was that said that they saw it this week, that they watched it because of you. And I went and put it in my queue specifically to watch, because I had heard of it, but you know, as it always is with found footage, until you hear someone else mention it, it becomes a thing that goes on the list, but maybe not the top of the list, because it's just a shot in the dark. But when I hear someone that I trust recommend one, then I immediately bump it up to the top of the list. Yeah, so I'm the same way.
I will be watching it very soon, is what I can tell you.
Yeah, I actually have the VHS I showed you of Savage Land. I have one made of Monster Project too.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
It checks so many boxes for me.
You will love to hear that one of the projects I'm working on is a talking head documentary about a fictional science fiction publisher from the 80s. So it's all about like 80s period stuff. Going to be creating a lot of our own material for it. I don't know if I have it anywhere nearby. Do you have a second? I'm going to see if I can find it. It's over here. I created props. No, I built it up for no reason. I can't reach it. I bought an actual Atari game, and then I redressed it as a fake Atari game that was created by this character in the movie. And I've actually been slowly animating an actual 8-bit Atari game to appear in the movie as this fake Atari game that this character created. So a little more in depth in this project than the one that I just worked on, but stuff like that. Fun sort of like retro stuff from the mid 80s. So.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I'm excited. Well, cool. Well, I'm going to put all of Chris's links, or you can find them in the description for this episode. If you have POV, or just go check out the website because you can rent the movie from there. I do recommend checking it out if you're a fan of found footage. Specifically, I would say even content creating found footage. It just checked a lot of boxes in general. But thank you again, Chris, for hanging out. I had a lot of fun. I'm glad we were able to make time to hang out.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I'm a new convert to voices, but I went back and I think I've now, in the last 5 days, I've watched all of your Found Footage Fridays. So I'm all caught up.
You're like Mike. Mike did the same thing. Mike and Serial, he did the same thing. Yeah, we covered a bunch of movies.
Yeah, I owe him. He's actually the one that introduced me to your channel. That's how I found out about you. So
I'm all about our found footage community on Twitter.
Yeah, I will say. I thought horror fans were loyal, and horror fans absolutely are loyal, but found footage horror fans are like so much more loyal. Like I mentioned in a one of the groups I was in, a Facebook found footage group, and I just mentioned a movie I'd seen 5 years ago. It's a German film called Tom's Video, and it was amazing. And I had a disc of it. The filmmaker had sent me, but I lost it, and so I was asking around. It's not available anywhere, but like internet sleuths spent like the next 48 hours after I mentioned the movie trying to find information for me to find this movie that I had seen, they hadn't even seen and weren't even invested in, but they were willing to do that for me. So like, if that gives you a sense of like how dedicated and loyal and passionate they are, you know what I mean? It's great.
We're committed. Yeah. And I will say this too, just because I always think it's important to bring up, because I think there are specific franchises and subgenres of horror that I think have some toxicity in their communities, just a little bit, you know. I think the horror community is great, but I think one of the things I love the most about the found footage subgenre community is that I think it's so funny how none of us seem to like all of the same things, but we can always talk about it. And it's just this chill conversation. Nobody's getting mad. Nobody's yelling out things or being ugly, because I will tell you, Mike and I do not like the same stuff. Yeah. We have very, very different opinions on quite a lot of things. There's definitely some overlap of some things that we love, but we have very different things that we're looking for, but we always talk about it with a sense of humor. It's always, and I got to tell you, like in general, that can be kind of difficult to find sometimes, where you just give an expression or a thought about a movie and you're immediately attacked because it doesn't match, you know, that person's opinion. So that's another really great thing, I think, specifically about the found footage group, the community that's building there. Yeah.
And there's not as much gatekeeping because the filmmakers are also the film fans. They're like, it's as close to a democratic process as you can be, because they're not famous. They're not on a pedestal somewhere. They're like literally the same people that are watching the stuff we made. That's why they made one, you know?
Yep. No, you're exactly right.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, Mike. Yeah, Mike is great. So, like I said, shout out to Mike, who I have to assume is watching this.
Yes. Yes.
Better be.
Yes, he's the best.
There will be a quiz, Mike. So
that's right. And you better not miss any questions. Well, cool. Well, as I mentioned before, all of Chris's link will be in the description for this episode, where you can find him, and check out Ask. Hopefully, but maybe by the time this goes out, it'll be more readily available. But if not, you can go to POV, support indie horror. Just go rent it if you don't have a subscription to them. I think you will find that it is worth the time and energy. I think that's all we're gonna have for this episode. So thank you everybody for hanging out. Make sure you're following Chris. Check out the movie if you've seen it already. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend coming up, and we will see you in the next one.
Thank you so much.